some people would say, well, it's mirror neurons, why humans are emulating themselves, why their breathing is synced up, or why their blinking is syncing up. But these also are occurring across distances where people don't have a visual connection with another person. They don't even have a voice connection.
Keep watching to learn more, and don't forget to subscribe.
Book 4 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Dr. Debra Lynne Katz. I'm a guest host on New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Before we get started with the interview with my next guest, Dr. Nancy McLaughlin-Walter, I'd like to tell you a little story. Nancy and I were classmates in the PhD program at University of West Georgia's psychology program. And we were in a transpersonal psychology class one day when our teacher said he was going to have us do a mindfulness meditation. Basically, we were to sit there for a few minutes and just contemplate and tune inwards with our eyes closed. There was only about 7 or 8 of us sitting around a long table. On my one side was Dr. Nancy Walter, not yet a doctor. But on the other side of me was our friend and classmate, Dr. Lisa Watts. And the 3 of us were feeling a little bored and a little rambunctious. So we decided we would do a little parapsychology experiment. We decided that we would try to contact each other during the meditation and see if afterwards we could tell what the others were thinking. And so as we got started, I closed my eyes, and after a little bit, I started to get a little panicky because I thought, oh my gosh, we did not decide who was going to be the sender or who was going to be the receiver. And so I really couldn't relax because I thought that was going to really mess things up. Well, we're sitting there, and all of a sudden, I hear this loud rapping at the table, and I look down, open up my eyes, and I see Nancy and Lisa looking at me like, oh my gosh, did you just hear this? It sounded like it had come up from the underside of the table. Well, at that point, meditation is over. And so Lisa and I turned to Nancy and said, yeah, how did that go? And Nancy exclaimed kind of in a frustrated tone, she's like, how was I supposed to concentrate? All I could hear Debra saying in her head is we didn't pick a sender and receiver. And all I could see with Lisa was as if she was dancing around the room. And as it turned out, that was exactly what Lisa was envisioning, that she was dancing around the room. She visualized that with herself the whole time. Nancy picked both of these things up flawlessly. Nancy is so receptive and so empathic. And she also just happens to be the director of research or co-director of research at the Monroe Institute. And she's held that position for quite a while. She formerly was part of a grant project where she worked at the University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies, along with working at Monroe. And then she went over to Monroe full time. So we have so much to talk about with her today. We're going to be talking about Monroe's sound science, about how this impacts people, both with their own personal development, how it relates to mental health and wellness, how it relates to remote viewing. We're going to be talking about all sorts of topics that have to do with out-of-body experiences, like how can you tell if you're really having an OBE, or are there different kinds of OBEs? We have a lot to cover, and we're so glad that you are joining us here. Let's get started. So Nancy, I'm so thrilled to be here with you today, and we have so much to talk about. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, and did you ever imagine when we were in graduate school together that we would be here today already years after you've become director of research for the Monroe Institute?
Never. I mean, it's a very interesting story how I got here that involves you, but I never imagined that I would be here.
Yeah, this is so cool. And do you want to tell the story?
I don't know how you tell it, but I usually tell people that you had emailed me and said someone had sent you a job listing for you to apply to, but that you thought that it was my job and that I needed to apply. So that's how I ended up here.
For those that aren't familiar with Monroe Institute, can you just give, like, in a nutshell, what happens there? And when you refer to pods, which I know very well because I spent many, many hours inside one, nestled in there like a nice, warm little pea. But can you describe what happens at Monroe in just a tiny bit of the history?
Monroe Institute has been around for just over 50 years. And Robert Monroe had created the Monroe Institute to look at the effects of binaural beats on the brain and the experience, primarily around remote viewing tasks, but also for the shared experiences, out-of-body experiences that he was having, which he had written extensively about in his books. So what goes on at Monroe is we have continued that research and education aspect at the Institute. So the research division is a huge part of what goes on, but ahead of that is the experience that the participant gets. It's a place to explore and expand their consciousness in a very supportive environment where people no longer necessarily feel like they're the odd man out for having exceptional experiences with their consciousness and other beings. So it's a campus where people are free to explore, and then within these defined programs. So we don't just offer remote viewing and meditation, but there are also things like spoonbending and psychokinesis, those types of offerings. But people are very much involved in the research and invested in the research. We get people who are specifically directing donations towards the research because they understand our access to a broad audience. And it's very rich. We get people anywhere from novices to experts and psychic and mediumship. So there's a wealth of knowledge there and a wealth of data that we're drawing upon to move the field of consciousness forward in research. And other institutions are aware of that, and we've been creating more collaborations.
So one of the things that makes Monroe unique is that research is such an integral part of the program, even when people are coming in to be participants and have these experiences, you're always analyzing what's happening with them. And a lot of times you're hooking them up to EEG equipment. And do you monitor other aspects of their physiology?
So not every program. We're looking at collecting data on specific participants, but even the trainers are collecting their own data within their programs as well. For example, our MC Squared program, the trainers there are keeping track of the hits and misses on, say, like a dice roll or seed growing, and then the remote viewing courses, they're also collecting data. And then during the breaks in the afternoon, which are built into every program, we do get volunteers to come into the lab and participate in any ongoing protocols that we have. And also, as the co-director of research, I will begin implementing a pre-participant survey. So moving forward, everyone who comes to campus, they would have filled out a form, which will then let us know if they've had any exceptional experiences and what areas they've had those experiences, and if they have any exceptional abilities themselves, whether it's interspecies communication or psychic mediumship or remote viewing. We want to know that. We want to get to understand our participants better so we can better utilize the resources for research. And there'll also be a system in place where they can then sign up certain days, and depending on availability, they can sign up ahead of time, just like they would for a massage. They can sign up to be involved in a research project that we have ongoing at the same time.
Oh, that's fantastic. And where does this research end up? What do you do with the data? Is it published in journals, or what happens with it?
We're working on several publications. There's we have limited resources at the moment. So it's just myself and co-director who are not only collecting the data, but we rely on ourselves to then clean it and disseminate it and analyze it and all the writing. So we're trying to get a process of volunteers and interns to handle some of the data. So that will help us process it faster, so then we can generate more publications a lot quicker. That's what this summer will be about, is getting the ball moving on that, which I have already started with several people.
Because the data to be processed is really going in and examining the EEG readouts. Is that right? And that's extremely time consuming.
Yes, if you're rejecting the data by eye in a program, it is time consuming. There are scripts that you can write for the program, but not all of the data can be cleaned up with an automated process. Some of it has to be done by hand, most likely because we're often using so few channels on an EEG, because we're isolating what areas of the brain we're looking at. So those aren't easily automated through AI, but we're working on getting that done faster so that it will then not seem so arbitrary. AI will be able to do that, but it's a process of then teaching it how to not throw out something that would seem like artifact to a machine, but knowing the circumstances, the researcher would then say, that's not artifact, that's something else is going on.
So it sounds like AI could make an enormous difference for you with your research. Like, before AI, how long would it take, let's say if you had 15 minutes of data, you had monitored someone's brain for 15 minutes, how long might it take one person to analyze that? Like just 15 minutes or longer than that?
If they know exactly what to look for, depending on how many channels were involved, it should not take that lengthy of a time for a 15 minutes. But to put it in perspective, my first year at UVA, I was tasked with cleaning the data on 110 subjects from the Discovery program. So 110 subjects, and each file contained approximately 40 to 45 minutes at a time, and then you're looking at that data 5 seconds at a time to see if there's artifact, and it's a matter of zooming in, zooming out, and low-pass filters and high-pass filters can get rid of most of the artifact for you, but then you still have to go through it frame by frame and make that determination by eye. So it took about a year to process 110 files.
Wow. And was that working full-time or part-time?
Yeah, about 4 days a week towards that. About 80% of my time was dedicated towards those files.
And with about 110 subjects. And then what would AI be able to do?
AI would reduce that time to seconds versus, hours. So but again, it's just a matter of teaching it exactly what to look for, which isn't a lengthy process, but considering we're involved in collecting the data and so many other aspects to the job, we're trying to send that off for other people to handle for us. So it's finding the right people to do that as well.
And are there other things that you're using AI for in your research?
Analysis. So I do survey research as well. And as well as I do, being a recent graduate and a continuing researcher, the examining the data is just finding correlations between a couple of variables. When you have many, many data points, is time consuming. Versus you can put that into a spreadsheet and then upload it to AI and then just ask it to give you whatever significant correlations it finds. But even then, it's still a process of using logic as well. It's more time consuming to teach the AI to have your knowledge than it is just to look at the data yourself most of the time.
So I get asked questions all the time about Monroe's audio programs and whether or not they enhance one's remote viewing skills. What would you say about that?
I would say that the subjective data definitely points towards that our music does enhance the person's remote viewing capabilities. There are other ways to evolve your skills as well. But through our program, we do find that they're able to bump up those skills quicker using the audio technology than they would just practice alone.
So when you say that your audio programs or music can make a difference for people's remote viewing skills, how are they using it? Are they using it like as ongoing meditation and then over time they see a difference? Or is it immediate where they come to the Institute, you test them without the music, and then they listen to some music and you test them again?
We do see a difference in their skill level between day 1 and then, say, day 5, where their skills improve across their program. For the remote viewing, we haven't specifically looked with EEG except for in the Discovery program. That's one study I would really like to get going, is to be able to test people before they start listening to our audio technology, and then several days later, or even a follow-up, some post-date. But very rare to find people who come to Monroe who haven't already started listening to at least some audio technology, whether it's the binaural beats that they are listening to online, which is not as effective because binaural beats, if you listen to them for a sustained amount of time, the brain starts to become habituated to it, and you'll no longer see those the following response for those. The brain just tunes it out. But with our new sound technology, we have designed using several different audio techniques, including binaural beats, phase modulation, and a 3D soundscape that actually does not elicit that habituated response any longer. Your brain is constantly looking for the changes in our signals, so it pays attention a lot stronger than it would if you were just listening to binaural beats, which is just the difference between two different tones, say 100 hertz and 104 hertz. Then your brain then decides that there's just the difference between the two, which is 4 hertz. And then after a while of listening to that, your brain says, okay, that's boring. You no longer want to listen to that, so we're not going to pick up on it. Versus our audio technology that changes that throughout the tracks and keeps the participant's brain engaged in the exercises.
And what is the theory behind the sound technology? Why would it make a difference with remote viewing? And why would it make more of a difference than other types of meditation?
So with the audio technology, you're looking at brain synchronization across hemispheres, which occurs during meditation. But during the use of the audio technology, it occurs in a shorter period of time. We've had monks who come to campus that say listening to the audio technology gets people to be in a meditative state that took them years to cultivate on their own without audio technology.
So you're saying that people who already have been using other methods of meditation will come to the Institute and do the sound technology and find a difference, even though they had already been doing meditation for a number of years.
Yes, it's been the subjective reportings, have indicated that there's more growth with listening to the audio technology, quicker and more advanced than having been in practice for several years.
And sometimes I wonder, since when people come to Monroe, the basic protocol is that they are put into rooms where they sleep, but then they have these pods. And throughout the day, there'll be periods where they go into their pod, close the curtains, and listen to the music. And then they will, after 30 minutes to an hour, then I'll meet back in the main room and discuss what just happened. So I sometimes wonder, is it really just the sound technology, or is it that they had an hour or so of quiet time where it was dark, there was nothing else to do? So they're being put into this specialized environment, and then they're coming together as a group, and all the people are together. So how do you sort out all these different variables to then be able to say it's the sound technology as opposed to all these other elements that come together when people go into a program?
Well, we've gotten feedback from people that use our app who have not ever taken a program, because it's our app is far more accessible than coming to campus is. And we also have the same subjective reporting through people who are taking the pre-recorded courses that are offered online, or even the virtual courses that are offered online. So it's not necessarily the check unit, the pod itself, or even being in that group environment. We're seeing those reports from people just using the app and from people who are taking courses virtually as well. So there's something to be said about those experiences being similar, whether you're on campus or off campus, or simply using the app for meditations.
And I know so many people absolutely love their experience when they go to Monroe, and they say it's absolutely life-changing. I have students who come and tell me about their experiences and say that. But not everyone responds well to the sound technology. As you know, when I came there to participate in that study, and we weren't doing the gateway program. We were just doing, you had us listening to just some of the different music, and then we would go and process it. But I found that it started to kind of drive me crazy. Not literally, but it was, I had a hard time with it. And so when I came and talked to you about that, you said there was a small percentage of people who don't respond that great to it. Can you talk about why that might be?
So the music that was provided during that particular study was specialized just for that study. So it's not anything that you would find on the app. But the differences, the people that I have heard from, let's say some of the music is not as pleasing for them as other tracks might be. I have found it to be when the track might be heavily laid with gamma frequencies, but they're not just gamma frequencies. I think it's an individual response as well. And that my theory is that it's very dependent upon the person and how their brain functions. Some of us prefer to be operating in those lower frequencies. We're calm most of the time. We're very alert and paying attention, but in those lower frequencies of like alpha, theta, and delta, where some people who might be high-powered business people who are always on the go, very, outgoing, gregarious, they function primarily in beta and then gamma. So I've been seeing psychics and mediums who tend to prefer the lower frequencies are more sensitive to gamma frequencies, but that's not always a given. But that is one of my theories that I'll be doing a study on.
Wow. Well, I've found as a longtime meditator that I go faster and faster into a trance state. So I do find that if for example, I took an extended remote viewing class, and the induction phase was about an hour. And also I've had hypnotherapists who will do sessions with me, and they have a long induction phase, and that drives me totally nuts because I'm already in the trance state within basically like 15 seconds or less. But then it's so uncomfortable for the body to have to just continue to, I don't know what it's doing, relaxing more and more, but it's like, come on, people, let's just, let's go to our session now. We don't need all of this. But that's happened after 30 years of, hours long meditations at a time. So that, yeah, I think you might be onto something there. And then can you talk about that study? Are you allowed to talk about it? Because I know you had private funders for that.
I'll give out specific results, but I can say that there were differences between the control group and the intervention group, where we saw increases in latency increases in REM and deep sleep. So there were definite improvements in the group that was listening to the audio tracks that were delivered on campus, even at a 6-week follow-up. And we followed participants, as you know, we followed participants as early as 6 weeks before they came to campus, and then for 6 weeks after they left campus. And then the control group for just as long of a period of time. So people might say that maybe it was just their meditation or their habits. How do we know there was a real difference in physiology? And it wasn't just due to paying attention to the output from the biotechnology that was used to collect their data. And we definitely saw a difference between those before they came to campus and then after they left campus. That's when the shift occurred in their improvement in their sleep. And even at 6 weeks, there was still those changes were still evident.
And you were using the Oura ring to monitor our physiology, right? So when we were going to sleep and when we were waking up, and our heart rate and our resilience and everything. Yes. So, and how strong were those results, or was the effect?
They were significant. That's about what I can say with that. The differences were significant pre, post, and between groups as well.
And are you able to say who was involved in initiating that study or funding it? Nothing like that.
But private information.
Okay. And yeah, I do have to say that that study was maybe about a year ago, or not even. Do you remember when it was?
It's coming up on a year. So August will be a year that it was completed.
Yeah, I do have to say that I have pretty much resolved my years long of insomnia and going to sleep, probably, as you know, because you'd get emails from me at like 3 a.m. And now I am pretty consistently getting to bed before midnight, and sometimes even by 11. Now, I wouldn't say that's the only thing that I've been doing, but I do think that did make a difference being part of that program. I also recently did toad toxin. Do you know about that? It's I don't know what the official word for it is, but it's literally from a toad, where if you lick the toad, you would die. I didn't lick the toad, but in a very controlled environment, a facilitator has you smoke a tiny bit, and it's not fun. Like I did not. It kind of makes you feel like your brain's exploding for a second. But about 3 days after that was when I just started to get like so tired by 11 o'clock at night, and I've been going to sleep ever since. I would never want to do it again because my whole body got really hot and didn't feel good. But that seemed to do a reset, and I was already going in that direction after the Monroe study. So I'd say those two things combined, like I'm back on track now and getting full night's sleep. Are you noticing a difference in the types of participants who come to Monroe? And specifically, do you find that more of them already have some level of experience with psychic development or meditation? Are you seeing a difference compared to the people that came in even a few years ago?
People that find themselves at Monroe Institute have already started a journey. Very rarely would I find someone who just showed up out of the blue and said, I'm here for a program. They usually have started their journey prior to that, and then came to know about Monroe through their association with someone else, or maybe they're listening to things in social media. We don't see an uptick in people that are having exceptional experiences or exceptional abilities before they come, but they are coming as a result of that. The difference that we are starting to see is that, and I think this is because of the global reach that is available with the social media now, we're seeing people younger and younger who are pursuing these paths and really putting a lot of effort into being more consciously aware. And I just want to say one thing about the sleep study. When I started the sleep study, I had to participate in the technology first. And so I had the ring on, the Oura ring, and I'm collecting data and I'm looking at my numbers, not really thinking anything about it until the first intervention group came to campus and they began complaining about their sleep numbers and how poorly they had been sleeping. And they were mentioning, my numbers are like 80%, 85, 70%. And it dawned on me that my sleep numbers were as low as the 40s. And so as a result of the sleep study, I think I started to meditate more consciously because I just consider myself to be one of those people that's just too busy to do it. But within a week of meditating consciously with the Monroe Sound Science, my numbers improved. My very first night where I saw an improvement, I went from a 46 to an 89.
Wow.
And that was significant for me. And I do notice a difference between when I do meditate and when I don't meditate and how poorly I sleep. I expect to sleep well tonight because I did meditate earlier today.
It's awesome to have those tools. I find that one of my issues is I'll start to do psychic work before I go to bed. Like I'll have a number of remote viewing sessions I have to do for clients. And so I'll start to, be like, okay, well, I'm not totally tired yet. I'll just start to tune into this session. And that has an impact on sleep for sure. Then you're waking up all night long and writing things down. And, but riding that theta wave is really helpful sometimes for getting data. And can you talk a little bit about that, since the sound science can put you into that theta state? Do you believe that's why remote viewers do sometimes find it helpful, because it's bringing them into that place where they can access data, maybe having like clearer visions, or what would you say is happening when they're listening to it?
Without having the data behind it, it's my theory that yes, they're operating in these lower frequencies, which is more calming for the brain and for the body to be in that theta range, and even a meditative alpha range, which then, as you understand, opens your mind up to be in tune with so much more than you would be if you're operating in the beta range, which is a constant thinking and list making and just going inwards, just that monkey mind that a lot of people experience when they first start meditating. So it does take practice to get your brain to calm down, to stay in a theta and alpha range. And the music that we have specifically constructed for relaxation and for sleep do rely on the delta and the theta ranges to put you into a relaxed state. So then your brain would naturally want to transition into sleep cycles as well. So yes, people who practice the exceptional abilities, whether it's remote viewing, psychic mediumship, they often come with a meditative practice as well that then helps them transition quicker into a more relaxed state where then they're then open to receiving that information that might not be available if their brain is engaged in other activities.
And then one problem that people name as a problem is that they're too easily falling asleep when they are doing any kind of meditation, and especially listening to the music when they're at Monroe or elsewhere. So what do you say about that? How can people listen and get the maximum benefit if they're falling asleep?
So when you initially start a meditation practice, it is quite often the situation where you're going to fall asleep because your brain is not used to being so calm unless it's ready for bed. So you naturally fall asleep. But at Monroe, we see two types of people. People who fall asleep during the meditation and they'll actually start snoring or dreaming. And then we have those who would say that they check out, where they know they're meditating, that they've been awake and aware of what's going on, but they don't consciously remember what happened during that meditation. So with those people, we tell them to set an intention before you meditate, set an intention to remember, set an intention to meditate about a certain aspect, or even try guided meditations as well. That will help someone avoid. For example, this morning when I was meditating, I was listening to a track that I, for the first time, I'd not listened to this one previously, and I listened to it for half an hour versus the 10 minutes that you can choose as well. And I was very conscious of what was going on. It was a guided meditation with a space in between for you to have your own time. So I had set an intention, and then I found myself actually, my consciousness was trying to go out of body multiple times. And I know I was awake, so when I felt that jerking motion, I know I wasn't nodding off because I was in a deep meditation, and I was concentrating these thoughts together around the meditation. And I don't appreciate having out-of-body experiences. I just want to say that up front. So,
really? What?
Yes.
Let me ask you why is that?
I don't know. I've had them since I was a child. And I think some of us just hold on to that. There's that little fear that if you go out of body, that you might not come back. And that's something that we can't always control. It's just natural for some of us to feel like if we're going out of body, our consciousness is going out of body, where are we going? Are we going to come back? Are we going to be able to make it back? So it's not a conscious decision that I do to not go out of body or to go out of body. It's something that has been occurring on its own, which I don't necessarily appreciate. I think it's more of the sensation of being jerked out of my body that is disconcerting, and I just don't appreciate it.
Yeah, that's very interesting, since so many people will come to Monroe or spend years trying to get out of body.
Right.
Do you find that there are some people who have never been able to get out of the body and then they start to after being at Monroe, or at least people like yourself who found it uncomfortable and then it made a difference? Or do you think some people just are not going to get past that?
I think you can train yourself to get past it. We've definitely had people who have been trying for years to have an out-of-body experience, and then they come to campus and they find that they're able to relax enough to then have that first experience. And then there's people like me who, they say, oh, I was about to, but then, it stopped or the sensation went away. And most likely it's because that fear started to rise up, or that doubt, or they started to focus. It's like focusing on the one thing and then having that thing, dissipate because you're focused on it. So sometimes it's a balance between not focusing too hard, not trying too hard, and also is the body willing to allow that experience, because it can be different. Let's say that way.
Different than what you're typically used to. And
yes,
can you give some examples when you say different? Like, what are some symptoms that one is starting to separate from the body?
Some people report feeling a vibration or a falling sensation or a jerking sensation. And then others report seeing themselves from up above. So maybe they're laying down and then they're able to see themselves from like the ceiling. And then other people report being able to feel the bumping into walls or seeing things that are occurring in other rooms that they shouldn't be aware of because they're removed from the situation. So I call them either classical out-of-body sensations or non-classical. So it can be many different things. And no one's been able to define what an out-of-body experience is that would be a script for everybody.
What have you been doing lately at the Monroe Institute as far as research?
Research at Monroe Institute, we have some ongoing protocols that we have kept moving along. One of them is with our program Discovery, where we collect EEG data while the participant is in a meditation, and that is across 4 days, probably about 8 to 10 meditations across those 4 days. So it's quite a bit of data. So that's ongoing data collection, and we're getting into the stages now. We'll be publishing soon, multiple papers on that. And we also collect data on a couple of new ones as well.
And can you talk about your initial findings with that study?
We are seeing brain differences between participants who get a number one hit on a remote viewing target, and then between those that do not get a number one hit on the target. So that's interesting. But we're also looking at brainwave patterns and looking within clusters. So the participants, they're like 4 to a table, and we're looking across time if they're developing relationships and possible some brain synchronization and shared experiences during that time as well.
Wow, that is really interesting. Are you starting to see some patterns there with the people that are sitting at tables together versus the people that are at other tables where their patterns look different?
Yes, we are seeing some following patterns. So if there's one person in the group who seems to be dominant, then the patterns of the other 3 start to emulate what the leader is actually, or supposed leader is expressing in their brainwave patterns. And there are also some subjective shared experiences as well, like out-of-body experiences and shared visuals and meeting each other out, in consciousness, meeting each other outside of the meditation.
And would these participants be together for a number of days at the same table? Like, what does it take, do you think, before their brains start to synchronize?
It's not necessarily a matter of time or even the depth of their shared relationship. Sometimes these can occur right away from day one, and then others, it might happen sporadically throughout the week. But often these relationships, they very rarely come in groups, so they may not know each other at all. So they're relative strangers, sharing these experiences from day one. I have yet to look closer at groups that are familiar with one another. So the last group that I had at my table, because I'm also a monitor during the program, they knew each other previously from online courses, but at the same time, the four of them did not know that they were all coming to that program at the same time. They just showed up and ended up realizing that they had all agreed to come to this program at the same time. So that was pretty cool. I haven't looked at that because that's more recent.
And how does it look when you are studying their brain waves? Like, is there a certain pattern that you could describe for someone that's familiar with the EEG research?
Not a familiar pattern. When someone's in meditation, we tend to see more alpha and theta in our participants. But as a pattern, the software that's licensed for the program, they have an algorithm that determines certain patterns specific to the program. So those are separate from what you would see in a typical EEG. So that's just an algorithm that would define someone being in a deeper meditation or having an out-of-body experience. But that's specific to their algorithm, not specific to EEG data or anything that has been done in a study so far, which is what we're hoping to create.
And so pretty much when it's being synchronized, it could be across the spectrum of any kind of brainwave pattern. You would just be looking for the similarities between the people sitting together.
Right. So we're more looking at percentages across the meditation. So maybe their alpha waves are dominant, whether it be 50% of the time or 60% of the time. And also I will be looking at the algorithm patterns as well to see if those synchronize, because the software takes a percentage on that. And then another study where I am looking at brain synchronization between pairs of individuals, I am seeing actually the percentages from those patterns from the algorithm lining up. So that's cool to see as well.
Yeah. And I know that there's been parapsychology research that oftentimes has looked at relationships between people that are married or are twins or are close to each other. But that's very interesting to be looking at just groups of whether strangers or people that didn't know each other that well, and they came together, and it's just through proximity that their brain patterns may synchronize. And was there something you initially observed that led you to doing this study?
The study was instituted before I came to Monroe Institute. So it's been going on since 2017. I came to Monroe through the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies in 2019. So my very first day on the job was actually to be involved in that program, which was pretty cool to see. I got to experience the music and see the data from day one. So that was awesome. So that one was already in place, and that's their co-director of research, Dr. Dunseith. He created that study formally.
And do you know?
Yeah, protocol since then, but he created it.
And was there something that he had naturally observed occurring that then caused him to want to look into that more formally?
He was interested in the brainwave patterning during meditations and during a remote viewing target task, not necessarily brain synchronization. The brain synchronization has developed over the last several years, where we were starting to hear about these shared experiences, and the monitors at the tables were expressing that some of the patterns were aligning across participants that they're within their pods, which led me to move it in another direction, or not in another direction, but in an additional direction. So this would be looking back at the data just to see what correlations come about from that.
Can you go over some common symptoms that people will report right before they experience leaving the body or believe that they left the body?
Okay. Some people report the classical experience that Robert Monroe had also reported, feeling the vibration, bumping up against the ceiling, and viewing themselves from up above. And then there are people who will tell me, well, I thought I was, but it wasn't like what Bob Monroe described. They'll say, I didn't feel a vibration. I just felt like I was out of my body, or that I was seeing things in other rooms that I might not be privy to because of access to the location. So it really varies, and I've told people there's a classical and non-classical symptoms, you might say, of having an out-of-body. So classical would be what people would describe as a Robert Monroe experience, and the non-classical for me would be where they felt like they had an out-of-body, or they were about ready to have an out-of-body experience, but not necessarily have that vibration or the sensation of bumping up into the ceiling or viewing themselves from up above that was described in Robert Monroe's books.
And sometimes people will talk about their heart rate speeds up tremendously. I think Robert had mentioned that in his book. I know William Buhlman, who's written extensively about his out-of-body self-exploration, talked about that in addition to the vibrations. Have you had people at Monroe where they reported that their heart rate sped up?
And no one has mentioned that specifically to me, but I imagine that that's probably another common symptom of having an out-of-body experience. For me, the last one that I had, which was just a couple of weeks ago, which was much like your experience with the frog. It was substance-induced, but mine was not intentional. Mine was completely just through just doing something recreational, nothing hallucinogen or anything. And then I had an out-of-body experience. But my experience was that I felt like I was behind myself, and I was hearing everything, the conversation that was going on in the room that I was trying to stay engaged with. But I heard it sounded like it was more from down in a tunnel. And I just got this feeling that I needed to stay engaged in the conversation. Otherwise, I was just going to totally detach from my body, which, again, I don't like to have those experiences. I wasn't afraid that time, though. I'm not sure why that was. I guess the substance lowered the inhibition for that.
Could you say what the substance was?
Can we now publish that?
Okay, I won't make you answer, but I have to ask it, or
Okay.
the audience would be like, "Why didn't you ask her?" So, okay, I did my duty.
Well, I will tell you. Excuse me. I will say that it was a very small piece of a THC gummy, and like maybe a teaspoon of bourbon about an hour afterwards. But I had this gummy before because I take them when I have migraines occasionally. That was the first time that I'd ever had that experience. And it wasn't just that. It was a experience that lasted for about 2 hours, which involved other aspects to it besides that sensation of being out of body.
So the first time I ever attempted to do a remote viewing target, I had read about remote viewing and I went online to someone's target practice site. It was actually David Morehouse's site. And I was just starting to do practice of a location, sitting upright. I was not in a deep state. And I suddenly got these massive vibrations through my legs. And at that point, I was already an energy healer. So I was used to energy flow, but I had never felt something where I would call it like intensive vibrations. Like it freaked me out, but I did remember back to Robert Monroe's books where he talked about that. So I was like, okay, whatever's going on here, I think it's like symptoms of when you are having some kind of out of body experience. So I laid down, they lasted for maybe like just a few more minutes, but then I went back to the computer and started to do a session again, and bam, they were right there. But you know what? That was now like 15 years ago. And I've maybe one other time since then have I had those intensive vibrations. And I don't get the feeling like I'm spontaneously leaving my body when I'm doing remote viewing, but I will use the approach of I'm imagining myself going out. I do feel like that's really important for remote viewing, is to imagine that you're going somewhere and moving around different perspectives and using your senses. But I look at that as more an intentional imagination exercise. Any thoughts on all of that?
Well, the vibration I certainly would consider a classical symptom of having an out-of-body experience. But then the rest that you describe at other times, I would say that other people would have the same sentiment and then be confused whether or not they were out of body or were not out of body. And as far as I can tell, it's all about your consciousness. Your consciousness is projecting itself somewhere else, which definitely for me anyway, I would consider going out of body. But at the same time, it's hard to tell. It's so individualized. You know, were you able to actually smell or hear or sense things that were going on wherever you had went to that you would not be able to know because you weren't actually physically there, but you're still picking up on these things? Like you said, the conversation that this person reported during your stay on campus, he was reporting things that he was not privy to through his physical senses, but maybe he was, if his consciousness had then left his body and went to someone else's room.
So would you say that out-of-body experiences are on a spectrum where you could be picking up information as your consciousness goes out, but you're not necessarily having this extreme sense of being separated? Because, yeah, it's like I know what it's like to suddenly find myself on the ceiling and like, what the heck am I looking at? And realizing like it's looking down at the body. And I think that's what you refer to as the classic out-of-body experience. So it's a disembodied sense, whereas the other sense is you're still picking up information, but you're not feeling like that. All those physical symptoms are disembodiment.
Right. So science doesn't really know. We don't have a checklist of saying yes, out of body, or no, psychic experience versus out of body. So we're still, I think science is still trying to figure that out. But it's not I'm no expert on out of body experiences. But I would more rely on the person who's having the experience to tell me whether or not they felt or they thought it was an out of body. But even then, in parapsychology, how do you tease apart anything from being, clairvoyance, clairaudient, clairsentient? And just how do you differentiate between any exceptional experience or any exceptional ability from another? So we don't have a defined checklist because we're still exploring those things in depth. And yeah, that's the fun part, is exploring.
Yeah, I had lunch with Janet Mitchell a few years ago, but maybe a year or so before she passed away. And Janet Mitchell was the researcher that Ingo Swann originally worked with in the early 1970s at the American Society for Psychical Research. And her first book is called Something Out of the Body. And I remember her saying, even after all these years of exploring this, really half a century for her, she said that there just are not physical tools that have been developed to be able to say definitively, yes, this person has gone out of their body, even though it lends evidence to it when they can see things at a distance, or even if somebody at a distance had a sense of them being there as well, which we hear stories about where someone is like, yeah, I had a vision of you in my room last night.
I have heard stories, personal accountings of things like that happening. One in particular, he said that his wife had sensed that he had been there during a meditation that he went out of body in, and she was able to confirm that as well. But they're just stories so far.
What tools would need to be developed in order to be able to formally measure that someone has left their body? Could you imagine any tools that could be developed to measure this or prove that it's actually happening?
I don't know about proving that it's happening, but I think gathering the information from people who have these experiences and then cross-matching to see what similarities and dissimilarities there are in reporting. Like I said, there's a classical and non-classical symptoms. So I can imagine amassing enough data where you could come to draw some conclusions about what you could consider an out-of-body experience. But I am aware of one research team who's working on out-of-body experiences. They're collaborating with another institution that I don't know the name of, but I don't know if that's the direction that they're headed in. I am interested in getting that information myself, and it's one of the tools that I am using to gather information from participants who come to Monroe Institute.
And were you referring to the researchers at University of Virginia?
Yes.
Out of body, would that be Marina?
Yes.
Marina Weller. And I know you mentioned earlier that you had done some research with the University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies. You were working with them, and I believe you had a joint grant at one time to be working with Monroe and UVA, and then you went over to Monroe. But can you talk about the relationship between those two organizations?
Right. So I was working for the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. I was there a little more than 4 years, I want to say. And we still have a good relationship. Our co-director, research co-director, Dr. Dunseith, he still works at UVA. So he's at Monroe part-time and UVA part-time. So the relationship is still there. And we have, I think we have active protocols with them. And we are also in the process of, they're utilizing some of our resources, our participant base, and we do collaborations with other institutions as well.
Oh, that's terrific.
So it's still ongoing, still an active relationship.
And one question I have is, do you feel that there are some people who really should not be getting into these topics or listening to sound science or doing programs like that they offer at Monroe or remote viewing or anything like that because of their mental health?
I'm not a mental health worker. I'm not trained as I'm a PhD in psychology, but not trained in mental health. But I could certainly see where there might be cases where people might pursue this direction and it may not be healthy for them to do so, but that would be between them and their doctors, caretakers. I do know that some people have sensitivities to certain sounds or light sequences, whether it's because they have the headaches or vertigo or they're just sensitive overall. But I think that it's an individual journey, and I wouldn't be able to say whether or not a certain group or a certain type should or shouldn't be pursuing these areas.
So if someone was diagnosed, say, with bipolar or schizophrenia, and they came to Monroe, is there a way that the staff would know what their diagnoses had been to start off with? Or have you ever had this situation where someone came and then they just started to have an episode or freak out or something like that?
We do currently screen for issues, whether it's we ask if they're active in psychotherapy, if they're on medications, and that's just for their safety as well as everyone else's safety. So we do screen for that, but you cannot 100% control for those things. People don't have to report them. They're not bound by any laws to report them, but we certainly tried to screen any potential participant who would not feel comfortable in this situation. And we get people who don't have issues at all who come for a program and after a day or two decide it's not for them and then turn around and leave the program as well. So you never really can tell. You can ask questions, but you can never really tell.
Yeah, I know that's a tough one. I will have people ask me that for my psychic development classes. And definitely, if they're already under treatment, you want to say to them, please talk to your therapist about this first. And getting too deeply into psychic work can be destabilizing for people that are already having hallucinations or things like that. So it's tricky for sure. And then also people that are paranoid, because definitely the idea that people can communicate telepathically or see what each other is doing outside of the body, for someone that can't really discern from what's really happening versus what they think is happening, it's easy for that to feed into their delusions, and suddenly they think all kinds of people are psychically spying on them or invading them. And I do find that a lot of times people are feeling like there's other people watching them or doing something to them psychically. And I never want to discount that could be happening, but that's a nice thing when you can psychically kind of go in and examine, okay, what's really happening with this person? Is it a mental health issue? Are they really being stalked by somebody on maybe even physical level, or physical and psychic, or sometimes it's a combination of things? Have you ever encountered people that just start to get paranoid, like when they're doing the program or like in relation to the other participants? Do you ever have anything like that?
I've not had those experiences from other people. I have received emails from people that I would suspect should be seeking more help. And it is suggested, not through Monroe Institute, but it has been suggested through mental health, that people who are schizophrenic and having hallucinations, the last place you want for a person like that to go is internally, because then they're focusing on themselves, and that might cause them to spiral, from what I understand.
I oftentimes have remote viewers who ask, what is the ideal Monroe sound science meditation to listen to? And I think I've even emailed you a couple of times and said, what should I be recommending to people? So maybe it's someone who's not going to go do a full program, but a lot of the audio meditations are available through their website. What would you recommend for someone who wants to improve their remote viewing or other psychic practices?
On the app, our meditations can also be grouped. So if they wanted to meditate to something that is going to help them be more creative or intuitive or going out of body, they can search that through the app, and that'll bring up tracks for them to listen to. There is one on there that I believe specifically targets intuition through a guided meditation. So, but it's also an individual experience. I would suggest that they go to the app and search online for specific tracks that develop intuition and these abilities. And then it's also a combination of what are they comfortable with. It's not everybody's going to have the same preferences for the frequencies or the spatial angle modulated music or the phase modulation or the 3D soundscape. Sometimes the track will be too fast or too slow. So it's also individualized.
And now Monroe has a program where participants get to explore their psychokinetic abilities. Can you talk about that program and if you have witnessed evidence of people affecting physical objects with their mind only?
I believe the program you're talking about is MC Squared. And the trainers there teach the participant on how to, like you said, psychokinesis, where they're affecting systems, whether it's growing seeds. So I think one of the exercises, they're given 2 seeds at the beginning of the program. One they're told to ignore, and the other one they're told to talk to and cultivate. And even though they're in the same physical environment, the one that they are focusing their intention on or attention to will actually grow, versus the one that they ignore. You wouldn't see any more growth than you would typically see in any atmosphere or any environment. So during that program, we have one night where either myself or Dr. Dunseith will go in with a shielded box that has many different sensors in it. One is to, it detects the muons in the air, and several random number generators and a couple of other things. I think there's even a radioactivity detector in there as well. So random number generators, we already know, can be influenced by just human consciousness. Now, muons are completely random in our environment, and it's like entropy. It can be measured, but it's not an algorithm. It's not something that's going to be consistent. And we are seeing people, and there's a paper coming out about this probably by the end of the year. We are seeing people who, even though they don't know that there are these measurements in the box, are able to influence them. Even the muons, they're able to either increase for a period of time like the random number generator, where it would go off random for a period of, a length of time while the person is focusing their intention on the shielded box. So we are seeing people that do have the ability to do this, and it's not random people like every once in a while. This is consistent through each program. We always have at least 1 to 3 people just in that evening that were there for a few hours, that they are able to influence what's inside that shielded box.
Yeah, I recently interviewed a researcher, Dan Graboy, who is I believe he's an engineer, and he's been developing a testing tool for spoon bending where it attaches to a spoon and he could measure the changes. And yeah, he's looking for other researchers and places to collaborate with so he can start collecting data on that. Maybe I can come up with you.
There has been studies on spoon bending and fork. I've seen like those brittle plastic forks. I've seen them bent in ways like curly cues on the tines on a fork that if you tried to manipulate it physically, it would just snap. But there are tests where they can look at the metal and see if it was forced into a position or if it just not naturally, but just occurred on its own without force. And they are seeing those differences. And we have, you've been on campus, you've seen the box hanging on the wall with bent spoons and bent forks. And then we're both from the University of West Georgia, where they have shoe boxes full of these things. And some of them have been tested under metallurgy, I believe it's called, some testing, that they can detect that the metal was not forced into the position that it's in. It's almost as if it was created to be in that position, even though it has physically changed from its original form. It's pretty cool when you think about it.
Yeah, it really is. I've experienced it a few times where I had the fork or the spoon bend, and it got like all rubbery and you could just twist it all around, and it only lasted for, maybe about 10 seconds at the most. And then it just got hard again. But Dan said that he can measure it in real time at the device, and he's got prototypes for a few different devices, and then he's looking for groups to test it. So I'll put him in touch with you just in case you might want to.
That would be awesome. Yeah, we had a participant, I think it was last year. She actually took a fire poker that we have on campus that's used for one of the fireplaces there. And it's a really thick rod. And she was able to bend it into a U.
Oh my gosh.
And then she was able to bend it back. And she was just this little tiny thing, no big muscles or anything on her. And she was able to completely bend it into a U shape and then bend it straight back again without breaking the tensile strength of the metal itself.
That's crazy. Yeah, I know those things are pretty thick too. So even to be able to bend it back. And did it look as straight as it did before she bent it?
Yes.
Wow.
I think they have pictures. They're personal pictures, so I can't share. But they have pictures of her posing with it.
If you could do any project, if money was no object, what would that project be?
I would say large scale group brain synchronization between strangers and between people who know each other to see if not even during shared tasks, but individual tasks, just within proximity, and see if there's similarities in brain patterns or brain waves, for whatever percentage of the time or dominance of a brain frequency. I think that would be awesome. But on a large scale, right now, we can only do a few people at a time, or like in my lab, I can do up to 4 people at a time, but so far I'm only doing 2 at a time because I prefer to do it in pairs until I get more results. But I think on a massive scale, just understanding the hive mind, like the Global Consciousness Project is able to show that we're able to influence these systems, just to understand how the possibility of these interconnections would be awesome, just to prove that, yes, they exist, and then to explore why they exist. So using other methods, I would say cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary studies on that massive of a scale would be awesome. So if anyone's willing to pony up a few $100 million, I'm available.
You won't turn it down. So with all that money, is it that you'd be able to buy more equipment and have more people helping you out? Is that pretty much where the money would go to for that?
Yeah, I would think the equipment and the facilities to do it on a massive scale. Right now, we have the ability to time synchronize up to 4 people, but only using a few channels on an EEG. So expanding that to include more channels, more people on a broader scale would just be awesome. Like there's the University of California, Berkeley, and they have that underground bat cave, and they're able to look at the socialization of bats, their brainwave, and how they actually do synchronize, and they do follow just one particular bat who's in the lead. But then this is on a large scale. I think they have over 1,100 bats that are working together in this social situation and synchronizing their brainwave patterns. It's pretty awesome to think about.
Yeah. Well, what would be the implications of this for people in everyday life? Like, why is this research important for understanding human interactions and behavior?
Speaks to the potential for us to work together to affect positive change. So oftentimes, when things are precarious in situations, whether it's personal or political or on a larger scale, like in a war, we can often feel very disconnected from others, and like maybe we don't matter or we're not connecting with other people. So to be able to show that we actually are working together, even on levels when we don't think we would be or could be, I think would inspire other people to just to know that they are actually part of something larger than themselves. Not for use in some evil way or anything, but I think to bring us together as a species, or even interspecies, because, if you read Rupert Sheldrake's, any of his work, you understand the relationship we also have with pets, and I think other groups of animals have that as well.
And could you see other types of animal studies that would also be exploring synchronization? Or are you aware of any other studies?
I'm aware of, it's been done in mice, and there are also human studies as well, where there's a shared goal or a shared task. And even at a distance, a global distance, they're seeing the brain synchronization during shared tasks. So that's similar to the study that I'm doing right now, where I'm looking at, it's a non-communication task where one person is told to just send energy healing to the other person, and the other person is told just to simply be open to receiving that intention. So I'm looking on it on that scale, but I have seen it what I've read so far is in mice and bats and some limited human studies, but definitely results in all three of those. So if there's people that know of other studies, please send them my way.
Well, this does seem so important across so many different disciplines. I've found with intuitive development or using your intuition, like to read other people, if you get in sync with someone else, and you could do that through a variety of ways, like you can look for, just imagine a color that they're vibrating at, or match your crown chakra to that person's crown chakra, or imagine you're grounding yourself and grounding the other person, or seeing what, if they had any grounding cord in your imagination, what color would it be? And then imagining you've got the same one, doing exercises like that, even if you might just say it's in your imagination, it seems to get people in sync with each other, or like people breathing together. I know tantric practices, or even in communication studies, I always found it fascinating when they would talk about how within a very short period of time, people will start to mirror each other. So their blinking starts to change, their breathing patterns change, even like their facial expressions and their voice tone will start to match each other. So if all these external things can be happening, you'd think it would just make sense that their brains and internally everything is hooking up too.
Right. So I don't know if you know about the Telepathy Tapes podcast. Dr. Hennessy Powell, she looks at autistic children, nonverbal autistic children who actually are psychically connected with their family members. And it's worth listening to, just to understand how someone we could think has no communication skills whatsoever beyond just asking or demanding through nonverbal ways that, they get fed or they get some, attention paid to themselves, that they're able to actually know what their parents are thinking across distances, and not even in the same room. They're able to know what their parents are doing or thinking or looking at, and then communicate in these ways through typing, with the new devices that are out now, like iPads and things. So it's pretty awesome. I've always felt that just because we can't communicate with something on its ability to communicate, for instance, you can't speak English to a dog and have them speak it back to you. I mean, they can understand us, but very few of us actually will understand what the dog or the cat is saying back to us. So I don't think that just because there's that barrier there, it doesn't mean that something's going on anyway. I think it very much is going on. Like you said, some people would say, well, it's mirror neurons, why humans are emulating themselves, why their breathing is synced up, or why their blinking is syncing up. But these also are occurring across distances where people don't have a visual connection with another person. They don't even have a voice connection or any communication whatsoever, and they're still able to do these things. One of the studies that used humans with the shared task, they were doing it over the phone, so they didn't have the visuals going on. But I don't know if they also were checking respiration or heart rate or anything of that nature, but that certainly would be interesting to know if they had.
This makes me think of empathic experiences. So, you're standing next to somebody and suddenly feel so exhausted, like you're going to just fall over, and then find out that that other person just had no sleep for the last 48 hours. Like, I and many other people have had that experience, or even I've had it where like I was waiting for a client to come on the phone. In one instance, I had just talked to the guy like an hour before, and he's not showing up. And as soon as I started to ask, like, oh, where is he? I got this wave of exhaustion, like I almost passed out. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? And then I realized, oh, I'm matching him empathically and he must have fallen asleep. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. He called a few minutes later and said that. I haven't really thought of it though, like as if it was about synchronization, but as you're talking, I'm thinking that's maybe absolutely what these empathic experiences are. And I know you've had so many in your lifetime that you're constantly walking empath from.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you think that synchronization might be the key? And if it is, how do we sometimes just automatically get synchronized, even if we're not trying? Or even is it just through, oh, what's happening with this person? And then even just through thought at a distance, we're getting synchronized? Or what do you think?
I think some of us are geared more towards just being open to receiving that kind of information, or being connected to someone in that way, even people that we don't know. I'm pretty sure we can all agree that at one point or another, we've walked into a room where other people have already been there and just sensed the tension or the joy that's going on. I mean, it's how we're able to cry for other people across great distances, just to hear about their story and get this overwhelming sense of emotion. It's not because we've then put ourselves in their shoes, but in some instances, it's actually where you feel what the other person is feeling. I myself have found that I cannot watch reels or TikTok videos where people are being injured, even if it's through some silly thing like riding on a skateboard and you fall down and you smack your head. I get this physical sensation of pain. It's very uncomfortable. So I just stopped watching those videos. As soon as I know someone's going to get hurt, I'll just turn it off because I don't want to feel that pain. And it always happens to me. So yeah, I think some of us are just open to it, and other people, maybe you're just too busy or unconcerned, or maybe you've built up barriers or shields where you don't have to become overwhelmed with these things. I've been around other people who can't even be in the same room with someone who has a headache because then they catch the headache.
Oh, yeah.
So it can be a little too extreme.
Yeah, especially with emotions too. That's why I think arguments can escalate so fast, because someone's angry and that anger shoots out. And then I know I'll channel it, and then I'll get angry, not even knowing what the anger's about. And it'll just start bouncing off each other. And if both people are sensitive, that's where things can just really escalate really quickly. I was surprised even the other day. I emailed a group of people, and as I was about to send the email, I got this shooting pain through my hand. And so I wrote, hey guys, this is going to sound weird, but which of you has an injured hand? And no one responded. And then the next day I wrote to one of them. Actually, it was Dale Graff, who I've interviewed here before. He's Irva's vice president at the moment. Sure enough, when I went to email him, I got the same pain in my hand, and he was one of the people who was in the group. And so I was like, I think you're the one who has a pain in his hand. And he wrote back saying, yeah, I did injure my hand the other day. He's like, I'm okay. Don't worry about me. He is very stoic. It was just so clear, and, it didn't feel very good, but that the whole synchronization idea behind all of this is, because we're not feeling every single person's pain every second, right? If we were, we would just be screaming out in agony, because everybody has some kind of pain usually going on somewhere. It's just not always extreme. So yeah, that's the question. Why are we doing this with some people? And sometimes it is a stranger that we just happen to be stepping close to, and other times it is people that we have more established relationships with. Do you have any insights for the whole field of parapsychology or any of these topics? Where would you like to see the field going?
I'd like to see more interdisciplinary collaboration. So I don't think we can look at these in isolated fields. I think there needs to be an encompassing way of approaching these. Typically, we get people from physics or psychology or cognitive neuropsychology that are interested in these things. And I think it needs to be opened broader than that. So I think in order for us to be able to develop the tools to then even be able to measure, we need to work together to understand it, whether it's just asking a lot of questions of these people who are having experiences, but also taking different measures, not just EEG and physiology measures, but there are other things that we're not measuring. So we focus very much on the individuals having the experiences, but what about the environment they're in? More often we're looking at them in a lab versus the natural settings, which has become a little easier with portable EEGs, but that has its limitations as well. So I just think cracking this egg wide open and just involving many different disciplines in the research of these topics. There's enough evidence out there to know that these things are real. They are happening. So then why, instead of working against each other to say, well, this isn't real or you're not doing it right, how about just working together to come up with ways that we can investigate these things on a scale and also in ways that are appropriate. I understand not every researcher is going to design and have methods and analyses that are going to support the field of science, but what are more ways that we can come together to do these things, to investigate it from all aspects?
And you mentioned portable EEGs, and that was a question I wanted to ask you about, because there are a lot of remote viewers right now that are using portable EEGs, such as the Muse, and some are promoting this and even making assertions that they can tell what a target is through looking at their own brainwave patterns. Like they could tell if a target is a object versus a location. And some of these claims seem to be unsubstantiated. So do you believe right now it is possible that through looking at EEG readouts that somebody could tell the difference between different kinds of targets? Is it that refined? And if that was even possible, would such a thing be possible with a portable device such as the Muse?
I think you need to approach these devices scientifically. So what area is the device collecting data from? And is that area of the head subject to artifacts such as muscle movement, eye movement, twitches, just anything that would give the implication that it was a brainwave when in fact it might be a muscle artifact. So looking at it that way, and even with the most sophisticated EEG machines, there is no script or definitive way of saying, oh, here's this brainwave pattern, therefore this person is now out of body, or this person has just had a psychic experience. I think you need to be educated, but it's also individual. These devices are useful, and for people who are using them for personal reasons. And I could see where someone would say, okay, I'm having this experience over and over again, and then this experience, I'm also seeing this brainwave pattern if they're looking at the raw EEG data. But being educated on what EEG actually is and what these devices, where the devices are getting the data from, what areas of the head that they're being measured on. It's important to be educated and to also back things up scientifically as well.
So I know at University of Virginia's Department of Perceptual Studies that they are doing some experiments with remote viewers and EEGs. I was a participant for a few days, and they had me completely adjust how I would typically do a remote viewing experiment to control for artifacts. So I couldn't be perceiving information and writing at the same time because they said movement would create an artifact. And so do you agree that if a remote viewer is writing or drawing at the same time that they have the EEG equipment on, that they really couldn't tell if those signals were from the movement, the writing, versus what's really happening in the brain in relation to the receiving intuitive information?
The muscle artifact, even eye blinks are noticeable on EEG. So unless you're trained to detect those differences when you're analyzing the EEG data, I think the algorithms for the personal use devices can, not intentionally, but people, yes, can mistake muscle artifact or eye blinks for something that they might think is actual brainwave detection. You'll see that in gamma ranges as well for the larger muscles. And even like for someone, myself, I mean, I have a few of these devices that I test just for my own purposes, so I can say, okay, what can I use in the lab? So yeah, unless you're trained to know, it would be very difficult to know. Plus, unless you're looking at the raw data versus what their software might present to you, those are two different things. So I have the essential tremor, and I often joke in the lab that I wouldn't be able to hook myself up to an EEG because I wouldn't know what's the essential tremor where my muscles in my neck and my head are just twitching all the time versus what my brain would actually be doing.
Yeah, what can you define that, an essential tremor?
An essential tremor is a neurological condition where the brain is just causing electrical activity to go through the muscles and the tendons. So it's creating the constant muscle movement. Sometimes it's more noticeable than others. It's noticeable to me all the time because I'm living with it. But an EEG would pick up on that and would give me a false reading, as a brainwave versus a muscle twitch, because it's so consistent. I've never looked, but I can imagine with this, as active as my head and neck muscles are, that I probably would have a hard time distinguishing between what would be an EEG pattern and what would be muscle artifact, unless I was looking pretty closely. I have to zoom in.
And so those that want to have these at-home devices, what kind of training could they get that would teach them about artifacts and everything you're talking about?
I think unless you're looking at the raw EEG data, I don't think it really matters. If you're using their algorithm or their software of the device, they certainly have the software is designed to give you averages and accumulated data points that would be very effective for someone who's looking to advance their skills or their meditation or their concentration. Because I know one, I won't mention their name, but they have a device that if your brainwave patterns are consistent in a certain range, it elicits one sound versus if you're not, then it elicits another sound. So they are very good for developing skills and training when it comes to that. So I could see where someone who is remote viewing says, oh yeah, I'm in this brain state when I've got a hit on a target. I could see over time if they were to accumulate enough data, they could make those assumptions for themselves. I wouldn't believe that it could then be applied broadly to a larger population, just to say, okay, the mean for the entire population having a out-of-body experience is going to be this brainwave pattern. I wouldn't venture to go there, but they are useful.
It sounds like if a person gets familiar with how they feel or when they know they're in a brain state pattern, and that tends to mean they're more on target. Kind of like if I'm doing a session and I start to feel really relaxed, then I know that I can trust what's happening, and I'll see that I have good correlation to the target when I'm just in that like relaxed mode. And so if I was testing my brain waves, it might show at those moments like I'm more closer to theta or something. But you don't think I'd be able to say, oh, I see this on my printout, so that means the target must be an object or it must be a tree versus a boat. Like there wouldn't be a way to be that discerning about the target type at this point.
I think individually, if you are running yourself on the device long enough, you might be able to make some assumptions. I don't know what the raw data would say, but certainly as a feedback tool, they are useful, much like paying attention. I've said this in other places that if you want to develop your intuition skills, you need to start paying attention very closely to what's going on during those times when you're right and when you're wrong. When you get these feelings, what else is going on in your body? Is your heart rate going up, or do you feel more relaxed? What's going on when you're right versus when you're wrong? Which also leads to the point of how much this feedback is necessary to develop these skills. I know in your courses that you teach, you have your students actually run sessions with other people that are not in the class, so that they can get that immediate feedback on whether they're right or wrong, so that they can pay greater attention to their own internal states to then be able to gauge when they might be right in the future. So it's all about that feedback loop. That's very important.
Well, I have two questions. I might not include this, but I'm just wondering, do you have any issues with acid reflux?
I've had severe gastrointestinal issues since I was probably 8 or 9, maybe even earlier.
I just asked because when we were talking about empathic resonance and synchronization, I suddenly got this intense feeling of acid reflux. And I was like, wow, that's weird. Where did that come from? And then I was like, oh, I wonder if Nancy has any issues there. And then it went away.
Since I was a kid, yeah. I'm in constant need of Tums and Pepto-Bismol, and I've tried all different kinds of diets, and I am on a prescription. It's just my body naturally produces excessive amounts of acid.
One final question. So, Nancy, you obviously are very intuitive yourself. You've had all these experiences, and yet you're also a scientist and researcher. And how important do you feel it is for researchers of the subject matter to also, at the very least, have their own set of experiences?
I don't think it's necessary. I'm a skeptical person, and I've had people ask me, how can you have these personal experiences and, give people psychic readings or tarot readings or just pop off with information out of nowhere and still be skeptical about the whole field? And I tell people, how do I know I'm not the crazy one in the room? Just because I'm having these experiences doesn't make them true. I mean, they are validating for other people. So I think it's having a healthy amount of skepticism, but not being so staunchly doubtful about the existence of these things, especially in the face of so much evidence that these things do exist. I mean, look at the Global Consciousness Project, the work that you do, the work that many of our colleagues do. Dr. Hennessy Powell, Dr. Bem, Dr. Simmons Moore, and Dr. Mossbridge, one of my, I'm a fangirl when it comes to some of these people. But the evidence that is being produced, you can't completely deny that there's something going on. We may not know what it is or how it's occurring, but it's definitely there. So I think a healthy amount of skepticism, combined with the willingness to be open to exploring these things in scientific ways that can then give supporting evidence to them. So we can at least move in a direction of, we can move beyond, okay, it's possibly occurring, to it might be occurring, to it's not occurring. Let's just move on and just try to discover how or why or under what circumstances are these being made possible. Because there's enough there where we need to stop saying that it's not there.
How valuable has it been for you as both an experiencer and intuitive practitioner to have these abilities and experiences as a researcher? How valuable has that personal experience been to your work as a researcher?
Having the experience was not as important for me as understanding that the similarities between my experiences and others, but also the differences. When I talk to people who might be psychic or might be mediums or, remote viewers, their experiences are usually different than my own experiences, and not experiences as in how it's reported, but in how it's felt, how there's this sense of it. So I didn't even realize until maybe a few months ago that there are some mediums that when they are in communication with entities, actually see them in different positions depending on if they were related or if they knew them or if they're strangers to them. And I myself, my own personal experience, when I am not familiar with a spirit, when I'm not connected to them from this life, whether I knew them or just related to them, when I know them or are related to them, I can see them in front of me, or I sense them in front of me. But when I don't know them, they're always off to my right, just behind my shoulder. And I found out a few months ago that there are some others also have that positioning of these entities in relation to whether or not they knew them in this life, or if they were related to them, or if they were just complete strangers to them. So I think it's important to understand that there are similarities, and that helps me as a researcher. But then to understand that there are these dissimilarities makes me even question further. So not just basing my questions off of my own experiences, but then being open to listening to people who have these experiences, to know then that there are multiple ways of having these sensations or experiencing these things in ways that make me want to dig deeper or go further beyond questioning just what I would experience myself. So it really takes your focus from the narrow, okay, this is what an out-of-body experience feels like, or this is what it's like to communicate as a medium, to go beyond and say, okay, Debra's experience, she's doing these things and having these experiences, and her sensations are similar in some ways, but yet completely different. So maybe I need to start asking more questions going in that direction or another direction, or just completely rethinking your approach based on those dissimilarities as well as those similarities and experiences.
Yeah, very well put. And don't you find it's also complicated because, we might be looking at, well, how do people experience the world around them, or how do they experience spirit communication or telepathy or precognition? But then that experience can change or be affected if they've gone through certain training or even over time, like what people experience when they first start to open up or they first start to study is different than what they experience like 5 years later, or 10 years or 30 years later. And so we're trying to make all these conclusions about things and the ways that people experience them. But one, like you're saying, they're so varied between people, though we can find those patterns, like you just described, the spatiality, but then those things may change for each individual over time or by what they're exposed to. And do you sometimes find like that there hasn't been enough investigation into what they've already been exposed to or what they're continuing to be? I guess this gets maybe back to the question of how do you isolate the different variables? Because we want to do a pre-test of remote viewers to see if a program like Monroe's program makes a difference. But can we really get people that had no remote viewing training? And how do you define training? Someone who practiced 10 targets by themselves, they may say, oh, I never went through training, but they did do that practice, and that practice of 10 targets might make an enormous difference compared to someone who walks in the door and they don't even know what a target is. So, how do you study all of this then, if there's so many factors and variables and differences?
Yeah, that's, again, goes back to that interdisciplinary necessity to this work. It's, how do you account for all these variables if you're only using one microscope to look through, there's many different ways of approaching one topic, and there's many different outcomes. He said everyone's experience is going to be different depending on, have they been doing it since they were a toddler? Or were they trained formally, or were they, maybe they watched a couple of YouTube videos and just connected the dots. Oh, I have been doing this since I was a kid, and maybe I should start paying more attention. So I think asking these questions are very important in addition to studying the mechanicals of it as well, if you can call it mechanicals, or even the physiological output from these things. I think it's all important for us to get a clearer picture, at least start moving in a direction where we're getting closer to an answer versus just closer to more questions at this point is what we are ending up with. I know personally for me, it is more questions.
So Nancy, why don't you tell us about the 2 books that you're working on right now?
The book that I'm working on right now, it's The Psychology of Being Told You're Too Much. Whether it's too loud, too quiet, too thin, too big, what it does to a person's psyche over time and how we actually limit ourselves based on how we try to shrink or conform to the expectation of others. Wow. And then another book I'm working on is the transpersonal journey of finding the Monroe Institute. So many people come to me with these stories of whether it's serendipity or happenstance or synchronicity. And each of these stories is so fascinating, and I want to get them all into a book so that people have access to them so they don't feel so isolated.
Both of those sound amazing and so much like what people are needing right now, for sure.
Yes.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory today, and it's been such a pleasure to sit down here with you and talk about these topics. And yeah, it'll be great to see what comes out of your present research with synchronization and remote viewing and all the other things that you're exploring. And we'll have to have you back to hear about all of those results in the near future.
Thank you for having me, Debra. It's been fun to catch up.
Book 4 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. Now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
The Complete Clairvoyant is a 3-volume set that teaches you how to access your own intuitive abilities for practical applications. These include You Are Psychic, Extraordinary Psychic, and Freeing the Genie Within. You can find these on Amazon, and you can also listen to You Are Psychic on Audible.